everyone. We're just waiting for a few more people to come in. We see there are a few in the waiting room. So while we just work through admitting everyone, we'll just hold fire for a minute. Excellent. I think that is everybody who was waiting is now with us. So welcome. This is the second session, stakeholder reference group session, that we are having to talk about the site review results and the shortlist survey. As you know, of course, we're using Zoom, and we do have a slight change on this occasion. So the next slide will just explain to you how we're going to handle questions. And the change really is that some people wish to ask questions in their own voice, in their own words, being seen on camera. So we are going to try that for this session. And the way to let us know that you want to ask a question is to raise a hand. And if you want to use the chat function to ask a question, we will use that method as well. And please also put in chat what your question may be about, and that just helps me manage the questions. It means that we might be able to put some questions together so that we're not asking lots of the same question many times. So if you would continue to use chat function to indicate what you want to ask your question about, that would really help us. So when we come to you to ask the question, you will be unmuted. So you will remain on mute for the whole of this session unless we come to you to ask your question in person, and we hope this works for you. Please bear with us. Chat and the raising hand function don't always give us the opportunity to see the order in which people have asked questions. So I'm going to apologise now if you are raising your hand and it feels like I've gone to 5 or 6 other people before you. It is going to be slightly difficult to keep track of who's asked what and when. So we're going to do a very quick recap from the team. Faces I'm sure you all recognise by now. So I'm Louise Halfpenny, the Director of Communications, and with us today we have Helen Brown and Dwayne Passman. And Helen, we're going to come to you first just to bring us up to speed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louise, and good morning everybody. So yes, just very briefly, because I think probably most of the people on the call have been following us and our progress quite closely. But we are coming to a key decision point in the outline business case process. So on the 1st of October, our board and the Harts Valley CCG boards will be meeting together and taking a decision on the shortlist of options to take forward for more detailed appraisal. We have obviously been working with you and sharing how we've been approaching the long list to shortlist process over the last couple of months. Earlier in August, we published the site review that was undertaken by the Roll Free Property Limited with Montague Evans and Curry and Brown. So very happy to take questions on that. We have also published now an engagement document which sets out where we are, what our recommended shortlist is, and the reasons that we're making that recommendation, and a survey of local residents' views, staff and stakeholders. And that was launched on Friday of last week and closes on Tuesday night. So fairly fairly intensive period of engagement to get a really good feel of the range of views that are there to help our board understand that as it takes its decision on the shortlist and enable us to get a really good feel for what people's views are and also any concerns that people have. So I'm actually going to stop there and just straight up open into questions from members of the SRG. And as Louise says, this is the first time that we've kind of done live questions, allowing people to speak. We've only got a dozen or so people on the call today, so I think it should be manageable, but we are really keen that everybody gets an opportunity to ask their questions and their chance to speak. So I would ask you to please be respectful of people on the call today, and keep your questions and or comments, because I'm sure some of it will actually be views and comments, brief. Okay, thank you. I'm going to hand back to Louise and she's going to get us rolling.
Okay, well, there aren't any questions yet, so I'm sure they will start rolling in, but we did have a session earlier in the week, and Dwayne, I came to you with a question about catchment areas, and there was a related question about distance. So maybe I can ask that question again, Dwayne, and Helen, you might want to come in. So the question that we had on Tuesday, which I think people have asked before now at public meetings last year, is about catchment areas. So is there a specified catchment area for a hospital's A&E department, and is there a distance time for people to live from A&E departments that's set down anywhere for us to follow? So Dwayne, can I put that to you, please?
Certainly, thank you, Louise. And I haven't met most of you yet, so thank you very much for your time this morning. And as Louise said, I'm Dwayne Passman. I'm the new Acute Hospital Redevelopment Programme Director. To come to that question about guidelines for the size of catchment area for a hospital based on population, there isn't a hard and fast rule inside the NHS which says you shall do this. There is some guidance from the Royal College of Surgeons and the Royal College of Physicians that does look at about 300 or 350,000 being the recommended sort of catchment for a district general hospital. Now, I would point out that those are Royal College guidelines and aren't necessarily adopted by the NHS. What we do look at these days in terms of critical mass of services, so ensuring that we have enough staff available to provide the services that a local population needs, we usually, for a district general hospital, look to around 450, 500,000 as being an appropriate population to serve. When you get into tertiary specialties like neurosurgery, major trauma, things like that, then you're up into the 1.2, 1.5, sometimes 2 million as well for cancer centres. In terms of the optimum time and distance, there's really, it depends on the acuity of the patient and how the ambulance service are tasked to deliver that patient. So in the West Hertfordshire area, they're looking at travel times and travel distances, depending upon where they've been tasked from, where they're picking a patient up from, and finding the hospital that's most appropriate and close to that call. Now, there's two specific areas, stroke and major trauma, and the guideline there, and this is clinically evidence-based guideline, is that you should be getting patients to hospital, start their treatment, make sure that they're scanned, and start their treatment within an hour of either the accident or the stroke, because it has been proved that there's better clinical outcomes on that basis. And a lot of work's been done in London on developing hyperacute stroke units, whereby sometimes a patient will bypass the closest hospital to get them to the hospital where the expertise available is more readily available. And I hope that helps.
Thank you, Helen. Helen, was there anything that you wanted to add to that?
Well, the only thing I would say is Dwayne referenced the Royal College of Surgeons and Physicians, and I think the Royal College of Surgeons says the absolute minimum catchment area you need to sustain emergency surgery is 350,000. I think the optimum is a larger catchment, and that's what Dwayne has described. And I think for our context, and we do get asked questions about this, not every resident of Herts Valley's CCG or West Hertfordshire accesses their emergency care at Watford. It does depend on where you live, and for quite a number of people, Barnet Hospital, Luton and Dunstable or Stoke Mandeville or even the Lister Hospital are closer. Our catchment area at West Herts is in that kind of 450 to 500,000, depending exactly how you calculate it. But yes, that's all I want to say. Thanks, Louise.
Okay. Now we still don't have any questions coming in yet, or any raised hands. Sue, I can see that you are raising your hand in the real style rather than doing it via the system here, and that's absolutely fine. So let's go to Sue. If we can unmute Sue and have her question, that would be great. Just unmuting you, Sue. There you go. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I've lost the bit where you can do the chat.
That's quite all right. Go ahead.
There are two questions. One is, I wondered what the cost of the new car park and the bridge are, and whether that comes out of the money that we are being promised by government. And the second one was about the floodplain. I did read the things that you sent me, but the Riverwell, as I understand it, is in the valley. Does that mean that will be that there might be flood problems there? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Dwayne, can we come to you first with an answer on the car park? So the funding for the car park. Let's deal with that one first. Thank you.
Certainly. The total cost of the car park, multi-storey, and all the enabling works that go with that is 41 million, and it is not part of the overall funding settlement that came for us as a HIP1 scheme. It's entirely separate. It's something that we would have done anyway, even if we hadn't been as part of a HIP1 scheme, so that we can improve, and we are very, very aware of the challenges that staff and patients have around the Watford site to improve that position.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Sue?
Yes, I think so. I just also wondered about this bridge. Is that part of it?
Yes.
It is.
Sorry. Do you mind if I ask Helen to comment on that bit?
Yes.
Yes, so I think this is when we've shared our thinking on this before, we understand that the gradient of the current car park is a problem. So when we build the new car park, it's a multi-storey car park. The expectation is that there will be lifts within the car park, and the exit from the car park will be at the higher level rather than the lower level, because that reduces the hill that people have to walk up. Clearly, the new car park, which we're working really hard, and the enabling works for that has started, should open in 2022. So there will be a link from the new car park into the existing hospital facilities. It won't necessarily be a bridge, but what will happen is people will come out at the top of the hill rather than the bottom. When we finalised our plans for the new development, whatever that looks like in whatever shape, assuming that it goes ahead on the Watford site or the Watford Riverwell site, we will make sure that there's really good connection from the car park into the new facilities, and that is level access, not requiring patients to have to walk up a steep hill. That will be designed out, and Dwayne is actually much more expert in terms of design, but we're very confident from our discussions that we can achieve what's called an at-grade access from the car park to the hospital.
And Dwayne, can we come to you with anything that you want to add to that, but also about the floodplain issue that's raised, please?
Not in terms of the Riverwell site, not that I'm aware of. I mean, I've looked through I hope you'll forgive me, I've only been around for 6 weeks, so I'm still reading through all the details of the documentation. But certainly in the last site report that was done for us, which has been posted on our website, there's no contraindications from floodplain on the Riverwell site.
So I will just come in briefly on that one. I know it is a concern that people have flagged in the past. It did come up in the session earlier this week, and I've undertaken to get more information from the Riverwell team on steps that they have taken to mitigate any risk. Because yes, you're right, we go down towards the valley, and there's a little river in the bottom there. The technical review undertaken by the Roll-Free and Montague Evans didn't flag a specific risk issue with flood risk on this site being any significant cause for concern, and there's an official kind of flood rating. But I do understand, because a number of people have raised it, that certainly there's a fear that there may be a flood risk. So we will get more information and put that on our website to just confirm what the status is around that. Certainly in the 5 years that I've worked on the hospital site, even when it's been really wet, there hasn't been a particular issue with flooding at the bottom end there, although our car parks can get a bit soggy at the moment, so we will need to make sure that all of the drainage and appropriate steps are taken to make sure it is managed properly.
Thank you.
Thank you. While we're waiting for further questions to come in, I'm wondering, Helen, if you can explain a little bit about how we see outpatient services being different in the future, because we certainly think at the moment that fewer people will need to come into the hospital for outpatient services. That's partly related to COVID and also technology. Would you mind just explaining a little bit about that, please?
I certainly can, Louise. I can see that a little sign that says 2 people have raised their hands. So while you track them down, I will say a little bit about outpatient models. So absolutely, yes, we are expecting, we are changing the way we deliver outpatients all of the time. We work really closely with our colleagues in primary care, with the GPs to work through the best way to get specialist advice and expertise for patients locally. We are doing much more digital outpatients now, and that's been really pushed forward because of COVID-19, and we've learnt a lot over the last 6 months about how to do that well. But in addition to that, we're looking at straight to test pathways, how we streamline diagnostics, clinicians talking on the phone to patients before the first attendance to make sure that everything's organised and ready, to really minimise the number of times we ask people to come into the hospital, and to make sure that when they do come into the hospital, we're doing as much as we possibly can in one stop. So we do expect the number of times people have to come into the hospital to reduce. In addition to that, because sometimes, you know, clearly people will need to come into the hospital to be seen. We've got a commitment to maintaining local outpatient services within our communities, but for some outpatient services where it's more specialist, we're looking at providing from 2 of our hospitals. So surgical specialties will be provided at St Albans and Watford in the main, and medical specialties from Hemel Hempstead and Watford. But each site will have its kind of specialist focus. So we continually develop. We will be spending more time a bit later in the autumn talking to you about our clinical service plans and the detail of those, and what we think each hospital's role will be in the future.
Thank you. And so, yes, we do have a couple of people who've asked questions. So Deepa, we're going to come to you, and then after Deepa, we'll go to Anne. So all yours, Deepa.
Hi, so I read the document yesterday, and I also shared the tweet that went out. For some reason there was a bit of backlash from the tweet, and I was just wondering, do you think a week is long enough for people in the surrounding areas to kind of give feedback on the report and what's happening with the communication? Because I know Twitter's not the most ideal place to kind of share these surveys, but I was just wondering what's happening with the communication, because I didn't expect the backlash from people going, oh, my hospital wasn't on there, or you've nicked our byline or something. And I was just wondering about the communication. Secondly, with the prospect of a second wave of COVID, what's going to happen to these plans that we have in place? Because I know the conversations are meant to be coming to an end in October, and how is that going to impact any changes that may happen in the future if we have another second wave?
Thank you, Deepa. So I will ask Helen to comment on the timeline and whether or not we feel there may be any impact from COVID, because she's sort of closer, her and Dwayne are closer to the regulators and their planning. In terms of communication, It's a very hot topic. People feel very passionately about it. We understand that. So, you know, we're trying to give people the opportunity to have their say. The gap is quite short because we have only recently sort of defined the proposed shortlist, and we have a board meeting in October. So the space to gather feedback from people is necessarily quite tight, because you do want to go into that board meeting with feedback from local people. So you have seen the communication on social media. We have it on our website. Yes, that's one way to get a good reach. Sometimes people say things on social media that they might not say to our faces, so it can be quite a fierce environment sometimes, but you know, it's people's services and we understand the passion. And also we are using routes through local authorities, through community groups. And of course, the main, well, not the main, but a really important group for us to hear from is our staff. This has been going on for a long time, this notion of new hospital services. And for a lot of people who've been here a long time, which describes the staff at West Herts, we're very lucky in our longevity, but a lot of people have seen it before and heard it before. So they're not really engaging as much as perhaps we'd like them to. And now we're so close, we feel we're so close, we're going out to our staff to say, listen, we really are approaching a milestone, and your views as people who work in the service really, really matter. So we are putting quite a lot of effort into encouraging our own staff to fill in the survey, because we think the public will be interested in what those members of our staff have to say, because they're the ones that know all about the services. But I'll ask Helen to comment now just a little bit on the timescale.
So the COVID impact. So this is really, this is really, really important to us, and making progress with our plans for improving the hospital buildings is, you know, something I've been working on for 5 years, and the trust board this is a really, really important priority, along with improving our IT and digital technology, which can really support care as well. When the first wave of COVID came, obviously it was huge. The hospital had to completely rethink. A lot of staff were unwell, and an awful lot of our time and energy went into managing and responding to COVID and this completely new environment. Having said which, the chief executive said to me, Helen, I want you to you need to be focused on the future. We'll all be managing COVID now. You need to be focusing on the future because it's so important. And through the first wave of COVID, I had so many people knocking on my office door saying, Helen, how are you getting on? We so badly want new hospital facilities. It's more obvious than ever that we need it. So we have, all the way through COVID, myself, Dwayne, the team, we have continued to work. It's not just been at our level in the hospital that priority has been given. At a national level, the HIP1 programme is a really big priority. NHS England, the Department of Health, have continued to work with us, and it's been very similar. The conversation I had with a colleague at NHS England was everybody else had been diverted to work on COVID, but not the team working on HIP1, because this is such an important priority. So that's just to give you a flavour. You know, we are determined to keep pushing this forward. This winter could be quite tough. COVID, winters are always quite tough and challenging in hospitals. With COVID still very much present in the local community, we know we're going to have to manage that. We are working really closely with our clinical teams at the moment, because we're getting into quite detailed discussions about the future service delivery models and the future design of hospital facilities. Again, regardless of where they are and which option, there's lots of detailed work to do, and we are we're doing as much work as we can with our clinicians now, but we're also being quite flexible about how we're going to do that over the winter, because it's going to be really important. But so all I can really say is, yeah, COVID and winter may give us some challenges, but everybody here, all of the clinical staff, this is what's giving them hope for the future. And actually people say, isn't it great that while we're struggling with really difficult stuff day in, day out, we've got something else to think about, which is hopeful and positive for the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anne, can we come to you next, please? And this is Anne Eilert. And over to you, Anne. We're just unmuting you now. Sorry, this is taking a while. And Graham, I've seen that you've got a question, so we'll come to you next. So Anne, over to you, please.
Yeah, it's actually Philip Eilert. It's my wife's computer. So
okay.
Thanks anyway. I was just wondering if there's an update on the professional reference group, because there's quite a bit about this group obviously on the website, but not much about the professional group. So I'd be grateful for an update on sessions, presentations and so forth. Thank you.
Helen, are you all right to answer that question?
Yeah, so we have got a professional reference group and we have had a couple of meetings. I think it is very different than the stakeholder reference group, and I think and we've had a relatively smaller number of people actually dial into the sessions, and when we do, we have quite different conversations than we have in the stakeholder reference group, because broadly speaking, our clinical staff want to talk about services and how services will develop and what the redevelopment means for their particular specialty. So, for example, a consultant dermatologist has signed into a couple of sessions and been really keen to talk about the future of dermatology services, how she sees them developing, what they'd like to see. And actually, they're really keen to develop dermatology on the Hemel site and have got lots of great ideas for that. Whereas in the stakeholder reference group, we've been more in the long list, short list, new site discussions. I think the other key thing is that our clinicians do have other ways to access and understand what's happening. So at the moment, we've got user groups, 14 user groups set up. We're meeting regularly with clinicians in maternity services, in surgical services, theatres, to talk about the detail of the scheme. So we have lots of different ways of getting the input of staff, or for staff to get briefed. So the nature of it is quite different. In terms of what I did mention earlier, and once we've got through the shortlist discussion, which it is quite consuming, and as Louise says, a lot of people feel very strongly about it, we do want to have more of a conversation with local people about the clinical service models that we're looking at and the detail of design for new facilities. So we'll be doing more of that going forward. And one of the things that the survey that we've just launched, as Louise said, we talk to our staff, but we haven't officially asked them before for their specific opinions. And people will sometimes say to me, and Steve, who's I believe on the call today from Hearts Valley Hospital, will say, well, what do your staff think? And I've not been able to quantify that. I can give a qualitative, Helen, I've heard lots of people say X, but I haven't been able to do a kind of systematic, well, we've taken that from staff. So following this survey, we will at least have a feel more specifically about the views of staff in relation to this specific question about where facilities are developed.
Thank you. Thank you. And Graham, we're coming to you next, and I believe you have a question about the long list. So I think probably, Helen, we'll start with you, and Dwayne, if you do want to come in, then do. But Graham, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, I'd just like to know really what's happened to it. On the very first SRG meeting, there was a slide came up saying that we would be reviewing the long list appraisal. We've had discussions on principles, but we've not actually seen anything about how many long list sites you looked at, how you've done it. We've had certainly, I don't think I'm the only one here that feels that they've had no chance to have any input at all in the long list process, never mind talking about this short list now. So could Helen perhaps development?
Yeah, I can say a bit about that, Graham. So the process that we've used for the OBC is different than the process we used for the two SOCs in 2017 and 2019. So I do understand that people who have been involved in the past will sort of scratch their heads a bit and say, well, you know, last time we had a workshop and you talked us through a long list of site options and we scored them. We haven't followed that process, and that is because the best practice advice around the Green Book and what's now called the SIAM, which I don't even know what that stands for, but it's basically the economic appraisal. Dwayne will know. Says that you have to follow a process and agree a score against a long list generator. So we did share with the group the long list generator framework and the 5 domains. We shared that in the last SRG sessions, and we also shared indicative site options that would fall out of that long list generator. And then a panel met and looked at the long list generator and effectively scored each of the domains on the long list generator, red, amber, green. So it's a definite pass, a definite fail, or sort of not a fail but not ideal. And that is what we've used to generate the shortlist. And if effectively, we looked at site options within that, and we looked at site options against the critical success factors. And effectively, in that process, the new site options failed the critical success factor, which was around deliverability and timeline and risk, on the basis of the findings of the Royal-Free Montague Evans piece of work, which said it would take longer and it would be higher risk. And given one of our key critical success factors is deliver by 2025 or as soon as possible after that, and it is urgent that we make these changes, that's the basis. We did, those slides are, are on the website. You're right, we haven't yet shared the detailed assessment against the long list framework, and that will be published in our board papers, but the findings are effectively what's summarised in the engagement document.
Am I allowed to follow up?
Yes, please go with a follow-up.
Okay, I'll be quick. So when you said a panel met, so just to be clear, there were no members of, well, how do you define it, the public, there's certainly no members of this stakeholder reference group on that panel. Whereas, I mean, I did read the Treasury Green Book, and it does say, chapter 4, paragraph 12, that it's very good to involve stakeholders, and this includes the long list stage. So are you telling me that that panel was a panel, but who was in that panel? Can you explain to us?
So the panel was members of the programme team, and then our Chief Medical Officer, our Chief Nurse, we had some Harts Valley CCG representatives, so GP, Managing Director, and we had 2 representatives from Healthwatch Hertfordshire on the panel.
Healthwatch Hertfordshire, which are a very precise organisation within the overall organisation of the NHS, because they're actually paid by the NHS. So in terms of public involvement, you're saying there was nobody at all on this?
Well, I wouldn't agree that Healthwatch are not part of public engagement. And
they do their best. The last I heard, they were down to a very small number of people, really, and to say that is reflective. But anyway, that's another issue. Okay, so really, we're not going to see anything about the long list appraisal, is that right?
Well, you've seen the recommended shortlist, and we will be publishing as part of our board papers the detail of the appraisal. And that will be part of the recommendation then to the boards in October.
Okay, but sorry, when you say, sorry, I don't want to dominate this, but when you say the short list, what I want to know is how you got from the long list to the short list, rather than look at these particularly 7 sites which you yourselves have designated. Yeah. We're missing the stage, long list stage.
So that's what we will publish, and that, just to be clear, it is different than the work that we did at SOC stage. So what we have is the long list generator, with each of the domains RAG rated and a set of setting out the reasons for the rating of each of those domains. And effectively, you take forward from that long list generator that creates your shortlist. We'll pick up, I mean, we're not due to publish our board papers officially until the end of the month. We'll have a conversation with Dwayne and Louise, and we will look at whether we can put our information on the long list framework up more quickly than that, so people can have a chance to look at it.
Thank you, Helen. I can see we've got a couple of raised hands. So Stephen Eady, we will come to you. But before that, we've also had a question on the chat function, which is about land swaps. So Dwayne, I'm going to come to you first, and I'm sure Helen will add also. So it's really a question about the work that the arrangement that we have with Watford Borough Council. So can you explain a bit more about the land swap, and will it mean that current activities, all the current activities at Watford General, will move to the Riverwell site, or will some of the Watford site be retained for hospital use?
Thank you. So as Louise has just said, we've started discussions with Watford Council around the potential to swap a piece of land on the Riverwell site with a piece of land on the Watford General site. We're in the very, very earliest stages of that discussion. We are looking to continue at pace and to have reached a conclusion both commercially and in legal terms by about Christmas. In terms of what we're going to put on the Riverwell site, what we're aiming to do is to move as much as possible, particularly of the clinical accommodation, from the existing site into the Riverwell site, and then look at what other pieces of accommodation around that would need to stay on the existing hospital site. But we are prioritising clinical accommodation, so patient treatment areas, absolutely #1 priority for redevelopment on that site. Now, how that's all going to fit together, we will come back to everyone on that one, because we've just appointed our architect-led design team, and they're just beginning working with our estates colleagues to start looking at how that will fit together in more detail. So that's a piece of work that's coming up. It hasn't yet been concluded, but I hope that answers the very specific question from the questioner in the meeting.
And Helen, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I will just come in. And sorry, Dwayne, this is the benefit of having been here 5 years versus your six weeks. So people will be aware that this is not the first time we've been round a process to look at redeveloping substantially new facilities on the Watford site. So back in 2010, with the Watford Health Campus, there was a plan at that stage to have a new hospital on the current combined Watford Hospital and Watford Riverwell land. And there are pre-existing land swap agreements in place that we can use. We don't have to, but that we can use. So Dwayne's right, we've recently restarted that discussion, really since we got the confirmation from the regulators that potentially more funding was available, which meant it would be desirable to look again at a land swap. But it does mean that the existing framework is there, and the concept has always been that we would look at redeveloping the Watford General Hospital site and what was the Watford Health Campus, but now called Watford Riverwell, together to get the best overall redevelopment possible. In terms of the land itself, as it stands, the piece of land that we're talking about is actually 2/3 owned by the Hospital Trust, and 1/3 of it is owned by, roughly, 1/3 of it is owned by Watford Borough Council, because the existing hospital site stretches down to 2/3 of the way down the existing car park. It's only the bottom edge that is currently owned by the council. And effectively, you know, the preferred option that we've set out in the shortlist and recommending to board, and it is subject to demonstrating the value for money deliverability and persuading the Treasury that they can afford to give us the capital required, is to redevelop a very significant new clinical facility on what is the existing pathology unit, car park and Watford Riverwell land. But the majority of that land is owned by Watford, West Arts Hospitals Trust currently. The car park's a slightly different story. That land is owned by the council. Originally, we'd expected to lease that land, but a lot has changed in 6 months because of changes to Treasury rules, and we've put public sector capital now in to redevelop the car park. And we will also be having a discussion about whether it makes sense to pick up the land that the car park will sit in as part of the land swap as well.
Thank you, Helen. Edie, we're going to come to you next. So if you can unmute yourself, you should have the ability to do that now. That would be great. And then we'll come to you after that, Steve. Okay, Edie, over to you.
Lovely. I've just got 2 questions. One is about this medical specialties. I keep hearing the word medical specialty, but the only thing I've heard so far is it's dermatology and diabetes. What is going to be covered by medical specialties at Hemel?
Helen, are you able to pick that one up?
That's number 1.
Should we we'll deal with that, Edie, and then come back to you if that's all right.
So we will be doing this in more detail in the next session and engaging with people going forward, and the people who are a better placed to talk about this would be Esther and Claire. But for example, respiratory, cardiology, children's services, maternity services. I'm sure there are others that I ought to be thinking about, haematology, the whole range of different medical specialties, neurology, that we would expect to see delivering from the Hemel Hempstead site. Many of them already delivered at Hemel, but it's about developing and enhancing those, and effectively we will see less medical specialty outpatients in St Albans, and we'll be asking people to go to Hemel because there's a benefit in concentrating the clinical skills and the equipment that goes with it. So Hemel will focus on medical specialties, including the ones that I just listed, and respiratory, cardiology, diabetes. They are, our highest volume outpatient medical specialties.
And sorry, Edie, your second question?
Right, it was actually about COVID. I know you talked about it earlier, but I have read, and I believe it's going round to trusts, that the next surge, the second surge, is going to be 5 times as bad as the first surge. So how are you going to cope with that?
Helen, you're right to deal with that one.
Yeah, well, I haven't heard that. I haven't heard that, Edie, and I think there's a lot of speculation. The truth is that for different places were affected very differently by COVID. So there was some hospitals in the east of England, which is the kind of bit of the NHS that we sit in administratively. There were hospitals there that saw very few cases in the first wave. And for them, I suspect that's right. A second wave, they might see significantly more cases over this winter than they saw in the so-called first wave. For ourselves, we were much more similar to London. We saw really quite a high number of cases in the first wave. Our expectation is not that any future wave of COVID would exceed our first wave. So nationally, you can get a picture and say, well, there might be nationally more hospital admissions over the second wave. We don't actually know, but they won't be evenly distributed, and there is no sense that places that were particularly intensively affected in the first wave would see significantly higher numbers in the second wave. We've no reason to believe that at the current time.
Thank you.
So the only other thing I would say, though, is along with everybody else, we've learned a huge amount from the first wave. Clinical treatments are advancing, and we are continuously planning and have got a range of plans in to help us manage over the winter. And I can't I can't move on. Yes, the virtual hospital should also help. Yes, so someone's put that up, and I was just going to say, we've also been a bit of a trailblazer here at West Herts, and our respiratory team have set up a virtual COVID ward, which treated more than 1,500 patients and was a really very successful service model. And it absolutely reduced the need to admit patients into hospital for treatment. And we are continuing our COVID virtual ward, and in fact looking to extend that virtual hospital into other specialties so that we can support more people at home over the winter and reduce the need for admission. Because we don't just manage COVID, we have to manage all of the ill health or all of the health needs over the next few months.
Thank you. Steve, if we can come to you now, you should be able to unmute yourself if you haven't already. So over to you, Steve.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Right. Can I first confirm that on the back says it's going to be published without being edited?
Sorry, I think you will need to say that again, Steve. It's not a great line.
Steve might need to turn his camera off to get a better connection.
Would you just try that for the question? Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, I've got a 50 megabyte bandwidth here, but it's obviously not working properly. So can I just first check that what I'm going to say is going to be published rather than being edited out?
We're getting sort of shakes of the head from our assembled audience here, Steve.
I think if I can help, I think what Steve said was, could he have an assurance that what he's about to say won't be edited out? Is that correct, Steve?
That's what I heard as well, Dwayne. Steve, it does rather depend what you're going to say. So as long as it's reasonable and respectful,
clean,
then yes. We don't generally edit these, so unless there's a very particular reason why we would feel the need to, we will preserve it in its entirety.
I'm not going to say anything inflammatory or naughty or anything out of order. Right. I'm just going to close my browsers because they don't seem to be helping. Can you hear me now?
No. It's not great. It's not great, Steve. But go ahead, and we'll do our best to listen.
Okay. So thank you for finally allowing me to speak on behalf of Hospital.co.uk. Can you hear me?
Yeah, carry on.
Okay. If you can't hear me, then let's just abandon it.
Could you
use Steve? It's just very crackly. And if this is supposed to be a question and answer session, not a Herts Valley say their piece session. So if you want to make a statement, you could put it in chat. You can send us something, and we will definitely take account of it. But it isn't the primary purpose of these sessions. The primary purpose is to take questions, clarify, and respond.
If I don't have the opportunity to say anything, then we'll just leave it there.
It's a question and answer session, as Helen just said. So if you have a question, please ask it.
So this has been put forward as a discussion. This isn't a discussion. This is a one-way conversation.
But Steve, you've got the floor. If you want to say something or you want to ask a question, go ahead. We've got a bit of time left. The line isn't great, but look, have a go.
Okay, I'll have a go. So thanks for finally allowing me in. I was a member of the SRG that asked to be able to speak rather than just to submit questions by chat. I've listened for 8 hours to the Trust talking at me, so I hope to be allowed a few minutes to articulate the views of many thousands of people from across West Hertfordshire. Some SRG members contacted me saying, why are we opposing the Trust plans? We welcome the question and we welcome the opportunity to explain. And if you'd like to speak to us directly, please email info@heartsvalleyhospital.co.uk. it's fair to say that HH and other groups have the support of many tens of thousands of people, as opposed to trusts who don't. Despite what you might think, we're not a protest group. We bought a site in Bricketwood to the trust a year ago. We see that it can achieve much more than has previously been suggested. We've worked in cooperation with the trust and the landowner to promote a vision for an A-class hospital that everyone can get to with local facilities. We're delighted that the trust now see the need to retain 3 sites. We're disappointed that the trust have not taken any of the clear sites forward and have, in our view, artificially disadvantaged these sites by manipulating the facts to lead to the conclusion that the trust reached years ago. Despite this, we continue to advocate a centrally located solution, as we believe it will be quicker to build, a fact the trust agree with. It will be cheaper, a position which will never be clear if the clear sites are not on the short list. It will be faster for people to get to. This hasn't been checked by the trust, and we will have public support across the region. So we believe that even if this current scheme goes to full business case, it cannot proceed as it does not have public support and cannot demonstrate a proper financial and economic case. That's what I had to say. Now here's the question. You said today you haven't asked the staff what they think previously, Helen. If you haven't asked them, will you socialise what we have to say with your staff to allow them to come to an informed decision rather than just a decision you want them to come to? Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So what I would say, if we can just put you on mute because that will help with our sound quality. So thank you. Our staff, like members of the public, are very able to see what the Hearts Valley Hospital Group are saying. So they are very free to make their mind up, to read all your information. We're not promoting it, but we wouldn't block it in any way either. We're not here to censor what information our staff look at. So they're very open to see your information. So you know, that's all we would say on that point. They're members of the public and they can read all of the information that you're putting out. Helen or Dwayne, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say all respect to colleagues at Hearts Valley Hospitals and at the New Hospital campaign. You're effective campaigners. You get your message out. It's often in the local papers. Our staff are very, very aware, and most of them live locally and see all of that. So we do not restrict in any way access to any of that information. In fact, Louise regularly sends out little updates to people to say what's going on and what's being covered in the news. I would be astonished if any of our staff are not fully aware of the range of views from the different campaign groups. Sometimes I feel that I'm not able to say as much as you do, Steve, because I have to check everything with the Department of Health and NHS England and Uncle Tom Cobley and all before I'm allowed to say anything. So sometimes I wish I had the freedom to say things like you, manipulating the facts, but I don't. And I absolutely don't agree that we've been manipulating the facts. So I will just say that for the record.
Thank you. Can we come to Raj, who wasn't able to raise his hand but had a question about the land swap and the sale of land. So Raj, if you're able to unmute yourself, and if not, I'll ask the question for you. Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Oh, fantastic. Sorry, I'm out and about at the moment, on my way to another meeting. It's going back to the real estate really, and the question was, you talked about land swaps on the Watford side with the local council. Is there any plan to acquire or sell or swap real estate at the Hemel or St Albans sites?
Thank you. Dwayne, would you like to start with that answer, please?
If you don't mind, I'll pass that over to Helen.
Sure.
To just sweep up after me, because we do have some plans to release land at the Hemel and St Albans site, but the overall value is not huge.
So yeah, so there's not so much at St Albans because the St Albans site is smaller and if effectively we will be bringing more services into St Albans as we develop the cancer and surgical services there. So there may be some very tiny bits of land or land swaps around the edges, but it's really it's not part of the plan for St Albans. For Hemel Hempstead, yes. I mean, everybody who lives locally in Hemel will know it's a large hospital site. It hasn't been, you know, since the services relocated to Watford, the emergency services component, many of the old buildings are sitting there unused, and it's not great for anybody, I think it would be fair to say. There is a real opportunity, and part of our plans for Hemel includes a new urgent treatment centre with new diagnostic.
Can everyone hear Helen all right?
No, she's
Helen,
frozen.
we just lost you. We just lost you there for a little bit. So we'll just.
If I can just pick that up,
Sure,
I think
yeah,
Helen
yeah.
was coming to the end of what she was going to say anyway. But if members are able to access our website and look at the 2019 strategic outline case, our plans for Hemel and St Albans haven't really changed since there. So as Helen said, there might be a marginal piece of land at St Albans, but again, we're doing a master planning exercise to go through that in detail with our design team, and our intention is to try and get some of those underused and outdated buildings at Hemel, services removed from those and put into purpose-built facilities on the Hemel site, which will release some land, but we're not talking really, really huge amounts of money for that land at all. Sorry, Louise, I noticed that Lynn kept waving at us.
Yes.
And there's a lady called Zoom user who waved at us a few minutes ago.
Sure. So Lynn's question is one for you, I think, Dwayne, which is about overspends. So Lynn, I hope you don't mind me asking that on your behalf, but the question was, how would any overspend be funded? Okay.
I mean, there's a number of different ways of looking at this, in that overspends can be generated one of two ways in major projects. The first is that we change our minds as a client. We change our minds and we spend our way through the limit. Now, we would have to go back to the centre to ask for more money. They are not obliged to give it to us, and we might have to find it out of our own resource instead. The intention of always is not to have an overspend. If it's the contractor who is overspending because, you know, they haven't delivered to time, or they've had resource problems or supply problems, or just problems building the building, then under the usual form of contracts that we use in the NHS, and these are national and internationally recognised contracts. It's called NEC4, New Engineering Contract 4 is the one that we usually use. The whole of that risk of overspend lies with the contractor. So once we've agreed a price, anything above that is the contractor. And if they come in underneath that, so if they actually are more efficient, then there is what we call a gain share mechanism. So they might get a bit of extra money, but we would get some money back as well out of that contract. And I hope, Lynn, does that help you?
Thank you. We've got a thumbs up there, so thank you very much. We are at 11 o'clock. I know there was a question from Andy Batten. So Andy, just to speed us up, your question was really about our response to Mike Penning's statement over the weekend. We have been asked that question by local media, so it will be on the Hemel Today website tomorrow. So if you want to see what our response is to Mike Penning, then that will be on the Hemel Today website tomorrow. So that leaves me to thank you all for your time. We're interested to know if you found this useful. I know we didn't get round to everyone. If Dwayne and Helen, could I just ask you to indicate if you've got time for just one last question, and we could go to Zoom user. We don't know your your real name, I'm sorry, but if we can just go to you just to fit one last question in, because I know you've been waiting a while, and Helen and Dwayne are giving me the thumbs up. If other people have to dial off, that's fine, but if we can come to you, Zoom user, that's great. Over to you.
Are you talking to me?
I am indeed.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, it's Helen. No, I didn't. It was just Steve and the fact that he was dominating the end of the discussion, which is what they always do, and it's really frustrating because we want to hear from the professionals and of course the public, but not the same thing over and over again as it has for the last 5 years.
Okay, all right. Well, that is, I suppose
This Helen Kirk, by the way.
It's oh, hello, Helen. Yes, it's sort of free speech, isn't it? But that's one of the reasons why we were moderating questions also, is to speak through and try and give everyone a chance, a fair chance. So thank you for your feedback. Sorry you didn't find this session quite so beneficial to you.
Oh no, I did. Please don't get me wrong. I did find it very beneficial. It's just frustrating when we get to the same. Anyway, you've heard what I've got to say. No, it's very beneficial and it was very helpful. So thank you.
You're very welcome. You're all very welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. And we'll be seeing you again, I'm sure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all.